Evening. Welcome to tonight's council committee meeting, and good evening again. My name is Matt Zimmerman. I am council member from Ward 1, and I am the chair of this committee. Besides myself, the committee members here tonight are Jim Neighbor, Eric Jenkins, Mr. Kemling is absent, Stephanie Meyer, Justin Adrian, Mickey Sandifer, and Lindsay Constance. Before we begin our agenda, I'd like to explain our procedures for public input. During the meeting, I will offer the opportunity for public input. If you would like to speak to the committee at any of those times, please go to the podium. I will ask you to state your name and address for the record. Then you may offer your comments. So that members of the audience can hear your comments, I would ask that you speak directly into the microphone. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes. If additional time is required, a council member may make a motion to extend the speaker's time by an additional 5 minutes. And if motion is seconded and agreed by the majority of council, the speaker's time will be extended by no more than 5 minutes. After you are finished, please sign the form on the podium to ensure we have an accurate record of your name and address. There are 5 items on tonight's agenda. The first item is to discuss health, dental, vision, life insurance for plan year 2018-2019. The city's plan year for health, dental, vision, and life insurance runs from July 1st to June 30th. Staff has worked with Hayes Companies of Kansas City, the city's benefits consultant for the 2018-19 plan year. Reggie Brown from the Hayes Company will make a brief presentation. Welcome, Reggie.
Thank you. Get organized there. Okay, so just jumping right in here, we looking first of all at just some claims experience for the past really plan year that begins July 1. So basically looking at claims experience from July 1 of 17 through February of 2018. And so far this year, the plan has run relatively well. Your claims experience actually compared to the full plan year from 2016-17, the claims are actually down about 3% on a per employee per month basis. And so when we look at that and work with Cigna to develop the renewal, really at the end of the day, it was all positive news. The initial renewal, and we often see this from the carriers, was about 16.5%. And so we went back to Cigna and did some negotiations on your behalf. But first, I guess I want to recognize one item within that initial renewal. So part of what we generally will ask for during the renewal process is a like plan. So we don't want any plan design changes. We truly want to compare apples to apples year over year. However, with your HSA plan, our intent is to remain with an embedded deductible for your single employees for your deductible on the HSA. And in order to do that, there was a mandated increase in the deductible from $2,600 to $2,700. So everything else was remained the same for this 16.5% increase, but I did want to point out that mandated change. From there, like I said, we worked with Cigna to develop what we felt was a more competitive renewal increase, particularly, as we said, the claims experience was positive during this plan year. So we went back. The highlighted green column here is the negotiated renewal without any plan changes, less that $2,700 deductible change on the HSA plan. Other than that, no other plan changes. That renewal, that final negotiated renewal for that same plan design, we were able to get down to 6.8% overall. That was about a savings there. As you can see, year over year, the original increase was about a $735,000 annual increase. We were able to adjust that down to about $306,000. From there, we wanted to look at opportunities in terms of where we could potentially save from a plan design perspective and still remain competitive with the core cities. So what the main change, the recommendation, the final recommended plan that we're suggesting here is the far column there in the orange. And in that scenario, we're looking at a deductible change from $250 for individual and $500 for family on the PPO plan, and moving that to $500 for individual and $1,000 for family. And you'll see here later in the presentation that does compare very well still with the other core cities. That change moved your overall increase down from 6.8%, the negotiated renewal, to 1.18% overall. So that savings there was roughly additional $250,000. So like I said, the net increase there in terms of just premiums ended up being about 1.18%, or about $53,000 over current. When you compare that to average inflation, where we're looking at generally on an after plan design basis of 6-7% in the market, we felt this was very, very competitive. And again, I think there's credit due to the employees and all of the work they do through the wellness programs and the staff and the work they do. And so certainly there's benefits to that, and I think we're seeing that in this renewal. Question? Yep.
Change it back, additional 52,000 onto the bill?
To go back to the 250?
Yes.
It would be about a difference of 250,000 or so. So the 306, the 6.8% increase versus the 1.18. So we're talking about a difference of.
By changing those two?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, I thought you said it was 52,000.
That is the $52,000 increase is the sort of that final column there after those plan design changes are made.
For all the points, for everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. I think I want to point out, though, as we talk about the deductible, and certainly that is a change, and we recognize that. From a total liability perspective, however, for the employees, when we look at the out-of-pocket maximum, it's still at $1,500 for single and $3,000 for family. And that's very, very competitive, and I think you'll see that as we look at the benchmarking that was conducted. And so we're not changing. From a liability standpoint, nothing is really changing overall. It's just that deductible within that overall out-of-pocket maximum. And note that the deductible does accumulate toward the out-of-pocket maximum. So it's not that the 500 is on top of the $1,500 out-of-pocket maximum. One of the other recommendations is involving the HSA plan. Excuse me. Today, the city contributes to the employee's HSA account $800, for example, annually for employee-only coverage, $1,800 for employee plus one coverage, and $2,600 for employee plus family coverage. During the council meeting that we had last winter, one of the recommendations was to try to begin increasing that amount toward the HSA as the contribution from the city. So at that, the recommendation, we are proposing an increase of $200 per tier. So the employee-only tier would go up from $800 to $1,000 as example. Employee plus family would go from $2,600 to $2,800. When you factor that increase in HSA contribution, plus the premium increases we talked about, the overall net increase at the very bottom there, rows 16 and 17, becomes 1.34% annually. Or about $61,000. One of the other recommendations that we discussed last winter was to begin increasing that single contribution rate. So today, anybody elected employee-only coverage, they pay about 3% of premium, which is very low comparatively to the other core cities. So one of the strategies that we proposed was to begin increasing that in phases over time. So one of the other recommendations here going forward would be to take that from 97% or a 3% cost share to 96% or 4%. And what I mean by the 96% is that is the city's contribution compared to the remaining balance, the 4% would be the employee-only cost share. And you can see how that phases in over time over the next several years as we increase that incrementally to 10% in 2024. So when we make those changes, so we talked about the premium increases we talked about, plus the contribution increase phasing into 4%. The rows highlighted here in yellow, so row 3 for the PPO plan and row 11 for the HSA plan would be the net contribution amounts or increases year over year. So we're talking about the single rate going from $18 per month to $24 per month. The Employee Plus run rate will go from $174 per month to $176, a $2 increase, and then the same thing, same $2 increase for the family contribution there at $244 to $246 year over year. And the reason, again, that the single is going up, the $6 compared to the other tiers going up just $2, is that percentage change we talked about on the prior slide, going from 3% to 4% for single coverage, and we're leaving the Employee Plus One and the family percentages the same, roughly 14% of premium. With this increase and the way the premiums were aligned, overall, the HSA plan is still going up about 6%, but the PPO plan is going up very, very little with that deductible change that we talked about. So at the end of the day, we're still not separating the employee contribution rates between the PPO plan and the HSA plan. They will remain the same. Excuse me, the plan design will still differ, as well as I said, the contribution to the HSA account is going up. We will continue to evaluate the separation of those rates between those two plans in future years. So as I mentioned earlier, from a benchmarking perspective, this is the analysis we conducted looking at Overland Park, Olathe, Lenexa, and Leawood. From a PPO perspective, that's going to be your plan design on the left-hand side of this page. The $500 deductible there you can see is well within the norms with respect to the other cities. The out-of-pocket maximum is as well. On the HSA side, you can see how that aligns. And again, the $2,700 deductible is within the norm. It's comparable to Leawood, slightly higher than the other cities. But note that that $2,700 change that I talked about earlier is actually, by having that as an embedded benefit, that really makes it a nice benefit for the employees as opposed to having to satisfy the family deductible within the entire unit. Next slide is the contributions. So here, overall, we're looking at percentages as well as dollar amounts. And as we talked here on row 11, we're looking at making that single contribution increase going from $18 to $24. Still well below the other cities, but as we continue to implement that strategy over time, I think increasing that percentage of premium, we will begin to make up some of that difference. Any questions there? The next section, we move into the ancillary lines of coverage. So the first being the life insurance. This was a situation where we were dealing with about a 40% increase out of the gate with Cigna, and we were actually able to use your positive wellness results, so a positive wellness overall risk score, to negotiate with Cigna and bring this down to about an 11% increase overall. So the premium rate went from 0.133 per 1,000 of covered benefit to 0.196 originally. We were able to negotiate that down to 0.15, which is still lower than where that rate was at 0.16 3 years ago when we moved it to Cigna. So we feel a little bit of claims experience, and then really the relationship to their manual rate. So
life insurance should be a lot more steady than things like health insurance. You'd think that'd be more stable.
yeah,
I'm kind of surprised. And it's still coming out 12.8, even with it being negotiated and everything.
sure.
I mean, wow, that was a hell of a chunk the first time through. I mean,
Yeah, it was really the
I don't get it,
relationship
you know?
to their manual rate. So the pooling rate that Cigna had established, it was where your demographics compared to their book of business, and that was necessitating the increase in their minds. So like I said, we used your positive wellness experience to help lower that. And that was information that we gathered through the medical plan. Yeah, so you have the wellness program that has been implemented here over the last several years through the biometric screenings and just some of the results out of that program. overall, we've seen health improve through that program, and we were able to use this to our advantage in terms of suggesting that, look, this is an active population within the wellness plan. They're getting healthier. Therefore, that should bring down their overall risk from a life insurance standpoint. The next couple of slides get into the dental insurance. Originally, we were looking at a 5% increase here. We were able to achieve a rate pass, again, due to positive claims experience. So no plan design changes on this. And the same thing with the Assurance Vision plan. We were originally looking at about a 3% increase based upon the renewal cap that was in place. We were able to negotiate a rate pass here as well. And again, at no plan design changes. A couple of mandated changes from an FSA and HSA perspective, so I just wanted to note these. The flexible spending account, employees will be allowed to elect up to $2,650 going forward as opposed to just $2,600. And the dependent care, no change there at $5,000. On the HSA side, employees will be able to increase their contribution here, $3,450 for employee-only coverage and $6,850 for family coverage. So the single coverage is up $50 this year, and the family on the HSA is up $100. So again, overall, the recommendations here is to accept the Cigna renewal with changes to the PPO and HDHP plans as laid out, and the monthly medical contributions suggested below. The staff also recommends the governing body approve the city's annual contribution, the employee's HSA, of $1,000 for single coverage, $2,000 for employee plus one, and $2,800 for family coverage. Staff recommends accepts the Assurance Vision renewal with no rate increase, as well as accepting the Delta Dental renewal of Kansas at the contributions described below. And lastly, the staff recommends the governing body continue the current partnership with Cigna, who provides a basic life and AD&D insurance. Questions? Yeah, so we generally look at that about every 2 or 3 years. This is the third year with Cigna, so we have not this year. And again, it's something where we feel like there's a certain amount of comfort there, certainly from an employee perspective with regard to networks, prescription formularies, those sorts of things to remain with Cigna. I feel like the Cigna partnership has been a good one. We feel like they have provided fair renewals over time, and that they do provide very good customer service for the employees and staff.
Any other, Mr. Neighbor?
So does that mean next year being the third year that we'll go out to more than one source probably and interrogate them rather than like an automatic renewal?
Yeah, certainly.
Any other questions from council? I have one question of my own. You had a comparison of health insurance premium city to city.
Yep.
Sean, and I didn't see any comparison for life insurance. Did you have happen to do a study on that?
Do you have that around with you?
Okay. Anyone from the public who would like to speak to this? Recommended action is to consider forwarding the medical plans from Cigna, the dental proposal from Delta Dental of Kansas, the vision proposal from Surrency, setting the city's monthly contribution rates as shown, as well as increasing the contributions to employee health savings accounts. Additionally, the staff recommends continuing the agreement with Cigna for the life and accidental death and dismemberment coverage, the governing body for approval. I'll accept the motion.
So moved.
Second?
Motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes.
Please take a comment. I know
Mr.
it's-
Yeah, Mr. Jenkins.
We sent it on to the council. But I just wanted to address the staff on this because it appears to me that the staff is making a conscious effort to keep our health costs down by the way they use the health plans, and that's paying some dividends back to the city in terms of how much it costs us to pay that. Because sometimes when you got insurance, like I'm insured, let's go for it kind of thing, and I'm getting this distinct impression that that's not a pervasive attitude, that we're doing it that way, that people are trying to keep those costs down. And so I just want to extend my appreciation to the staff for being conscious of that. And I think it's kind of an education process as well, and everybody getting on board. It's a team kind of effort. You know, we're all working together trying to keep our costs down and still have good coverage, you know, and have everybody taken care of. So I just want to make that comment.
I second that.
Thank you. We'll pass that information on.
Second item is an overview of 2017 Economic Development Report and Economic Incentives Presentation. Finance Director Rogers will present an overview of the 2017 Economic Development Report. And Joe Sereno and Kutak Rock, the city's bond counsel, will make a brief presentation about economic development incentives used by municipalities. This item is for informational purposes only. Welcome, Maureen.
Well, it's been 2 or 3 years since I've brought this to you to actually present. We just kind of sent it out. We presented the first couple years, but we thought with some new council members, it would be a good time to go back through it. And its purpose, as Councilman Zimmerman said, is just for education. And the reason we created this report in the first place was a couple reasons. And a little later in the agenda tonight, we'll talk about policy statement 66, the comprehensive financial policy. But as part of that discussion, this report came out of that. There were some pieces of information that the council at that time wanted to have presented, and also to be an educational resource for the entire community, staff and the council. And so you have information that you can talk to your constituents about when they ask questions. And some of the performance information that the policy required was commercial assessed valuation, and we'll talk about that a little bit, what that means, what in terms of goals. And as we look at the tables, you'll see the before and after assessed valuation and the taxes, the new property tax revenue. Another thing something that's happened since the last time I presented, there's also an accounting pronouncement, GASB 77, that requires us to disclose in our CAFR the foregone revenue for these different types of tools. And so as I put this together, I'm also putting that together. I'll just kind of go through the book and go through it pretty quickly and try to hit the high points. There's an executive summary where each year we kind of look at what were the big things that happened in that year. And obviously we achieved in 17 some really long-term goals with Westbrook Green, approval of redevelopment of Westbrook Village Shopping Center. And there's a little paragraph in the summary about each, but there's also more information later in the report about the financial pieces, those page numbers. And also Neiman Now, after over a year of work on that, the report describes the progress on that. And then the Aztec Theater has been really a long-term goal that we've had, and so we're enjoying watching the progress with that. We also wanted to highlight the decreasing unemployment rate that we have here in Shawnee, and we compare very well with the Kansas City Metro and the state. And we're at levels now that are considered full employment, because you're always going to have some level of unemployment. But Shawnee's gone from 4.6 to 2.8 since 2013. And so that's lower than 3.2 for Kansas and 3.3 for the Kansas City metro area. So those are fantastic. And probably at this point, you've all had a chance to become familiar with our priority-based budgeting. This is just a reminder. This is the result map for the result of economic growth and vitality, and the little bubbles around it are the definitions, the actions that you would take in order to achieve that goal. And so hopefully in this report, it demonstrates the different ways that these are being achieved. So one of the big goals in the policy statement 66 has to do with the percentage of commercial assessed valuation compared to residential. And as you all probably know, the commercial is valued at a higher rate. And so the idea is to shift some of the burden off of residents and put it on businesses. And so this is something that a lot of the cities track. This year, we went down slightly from 26.1 to 25.4 commercial. But if you look at our peer cities, all but one of them went down and one stayed the same. So I think what we see here is residential growth was strong and commercial growth was strong. And so there wasn't a lot of change, or there wasn't growth in that ratio in this particular year. But from 13 to 17, we went from 22.9 to 25.4. So we're moving toward the goal. Throughout the report, you'll see these little blue boxes, and these are different aspects of goals of economic growth and development. And so as you go through and look at the different incentives, you'll see different ones of these bolded, and that's the goals that that particular incentive tool is focused on. The section of the overview of 2017 development, we just kind of go through and give an overview of everything that's been built, approved, built, whatever stage and phase of development it's in, whether it was incentivized, however it came to be, just so you have a good overview. Throughout the report, there are several maps. This one's the broadest, and gives you an idea that we have projects going on the east and west side of town, and what types they are and whether they're current or pending. And then there's maps that break some of these down into more detail. So the first one of the tools that we'll look at is tax abatements. And these are the ad valorem property tax abatements. We just approved, you all just approved a few of them just in the last couple of months, the Service Master and NASDAR. So this is the tool we're talking about there. And we had 4 complete during 2017. And they were fairly small projects, and so the combined growth of those 4 was about $1.3 million, and total new city taxes $132,000, and for all the jurisdictions $684,000. And we track the jobs, so that we had of those it was 118 direct jobs, and then that we also use the CERI, the county economic organization that tracks those type of statistics. And they have multipliers for different types of businesses. And so that's where those indirect jobs come from. And I probably won't go through this much detail, but all these tables tend to be laid out pretty much the same. And I went back and looked. We've had 4 reports prior to this. If you add up the completed from the reports prior, the assessed valuation growth was 33 million for 24 completed projects. And 2.5 or 2,500 new jobs in those projects. Those go back about 20 years or so. Active tax abatements, about $7.5 million new growth. One thing to point out on this one, and there's a little footnote at the bottom of it, you do see negative cumulative new taxes and very low for the city only, and that's because of McLean. That's a little bit different project where in order to keep that business in town, the council at that time approved an abatement on a property that was already pretty well developed. So it went off the tax rolls. So actually there was a loss in taxes during that time. But that was the decision, was to keep those jobs. And so if you look over in the jobs column, they did report for 17,289 jobs. So that's the trade-off there. But normally, most of these start out with vacant land that's valued at very little, so the growth potential is really high. KNRA, the Kansas Neighborhood Revitalization Act, is a little bit, it's similar. It's another property tax. It's actually a rebate program rather than an abatement. And throughout the report, each section describes how these work in detail. So if you wonder, you can go back and look at those. We had 6 go off in 2017. And these can be residential or commercial. And you see them all over this downtown section of the city. And it's a real nice way to develop infill property. So I went back and looked at the prior reports, and the total assessed valuation growth was about 2.4 million for 18 projects. The first ones started to be completed in 2015, and then a little over 200,000 in the 10% city revenue. This program is in its second 10-year pre-approval. This program is nice because it's pretty well set out how it works. The other jurisdictions approve for a 10-year period, and then it can be, each project works pretty much the same way, and it can be approved by staff. It's fairly easy for the developer or homeowner to do, and it's got pretty clear rules. We work through the county. And active properties, we got quite a few of these. We got some in the new expanded Area B that are active this time. And these are about 1.4 million in increased assessed value. Community Improvement District, or CID, the one we have active now is Tim Quivira, that is moving along pretty nicely. It has a CID cap of 1.375 million pay as you go, and it can be completed in probably 4 years or less, because we've already paid out over $800,000 for it. And so that one has worked pretty well for us. Some new approvals in 2017, Belmont Promenade and Westbrook Green. The Transportation Development District, TDD, is real similar to CIDs. Both of these involve levying a special additional sales tax. And all of that is spelled out in the tables there. Shawnee Plaza, the way that we structured this project was the feasibility study provided some ramp up time for them to build it and get it leased up. And so it took it till 16 or 17 to really, for the projections to be at the full build out level. So For the first few years, the sales tax and the TDD were, they exceeded projections, but now that the projections have caught up, now the actuals are lagging behind the projections. And the way that the purpose of the TDD in this project, along with a $50,000 a year special assessment, were to pay the bond payments on relocating Midland Drive to make room for the pad sites. So when we get to the TIF, I'll talk to you about how that is working and how the TIF is compensating for the shortfall in the TDD. TIF districts and project plans, this is just a little summary of what districts we have and what projects we have within them. There may be, we'll see what happens if there may be an item coming forward on the Cobblestone District to repeal that one if the development that's currently looking at that goes through. And then we have Hodgdon doesn't have a project plan, and we'll talk about Shawnee Plaza and Prairie Pines, and then the last two are new. So the active TIFs, Shawnee Plaza, the property tax, because of really healthy valuations in the last 2 or 3 years, is running ahead of projections. The sales tax increment is running behind projections. So when we constructed the designed the redevelopment agreement, there was a provision in there that there would be a reserve for 1 year of the bond payments. So what's happening is that because of the requirement to maintain that reserve, we kind of hold back some of what we would have distributed to the developer in the TIF, so that we make sure that the city is made whole on those payments. So the TIF is compensating for the TDD. And that looks like that will work for the foreseeable future. And we've talked to the developer. The developer is very much aware of all of that. But I wanted you to be aware of it as well. And then Belmont and Westbrook Green also have TIFs. Benefit districts, some of these have been around a while. Some of them are active, and some of them, each year some go off. Then our newest benefit district is Clear Creek Parkway. And that'll start being assessed in 2018, or we'll turn it in to the county, and they'll start paying this winter and next spring, the property owners, for that one. So that's something to be aware of. And then the 53rd Street is the newest benefit district that was just approved just in the last couple of months. Seed agreements, we now have for the first time some completed seed agreements. And this gives you an idea of where the jobs fell out on those and their local contribution credits. Wesco and Mile High and General Automatic Sprinkler all are finished with theirs. And it looked like altogether we have issued about $450,000 in seed agreements, and for all of these before this year. And then this year there are some larger ones with higher paying jobs. So the ones that are being considered or have already been approved in 2018 are some of by far the largest that we have done, but there's some strategic ones with what the program is designed to promote is high paying jobs. In 2017, Metro Air and Ink Cycle were the agreements that were approved. And the way this works is once they're approved, they perform what they're supposed to do for the first year, and then the beginning of that next year, they turn in their certification to me about what they did. They either, if it's a couple of them are a pay-go, and they either get their payment or they get told whether we let them know that they've been forgiven for the amount for that year. And I won't say too much about the excise tax abatements because Paul Chaffee talks about those. I think we just talked about those not too long ago, but we had several of them completed or expired for this last year. We're, about 35 million in appraised value, quite a few homes, and a few businesses. And we have quite a few that are still outstanding. The Westlink Business Center had one abatement for the entire property. So as those continue to come on, it's not continued. That was abated a long time ago. Conduit debt, this is something that we don't do a whole lot of anymore. We're down to 2 of them. Several of them have matured or they've restructured them over the last few years. What this is the city can sponsor tax-exempt debt for qualifying projects. But these are pretty much all that we have left of these. And that's pretty much the entire report. If you have any questions or anything you'd like me to go over a little bit more, but that's kind of hitting the high points of it.
All right, thank you, Maureen. Is there any discussion from council? Mr. Neighbor?
Excuse me, I don't have a question. My question is, can you just, maybe this week you put out the March 18 sales tax and use tax report, since we're sort of there, can you just, in 25 words or less, give a summary of what that was?
Oh, okay. Looks like for the holiday season months and even into January, pretty good growth. And I think I get a chance to have more detail than most everyone else, and sometimes it's not a real exact science. Sometimes the detail doesn't tell me as much as I want to know, but it looks to me like it was just a good consumer confidence and a good holiday season. For March, I think the sales tax part was like a little over 3% above this month last year. I think some of that also has to do with we had a cold month in January, and the gas and electric is a part of the sales tax too. It's not all stores, so that's part of it. But I think mostly the last few months is just good overall economy. It's not like there's one store or one particular anomaly or anything that is jumping out at me. So I would say that's what I will take into consideration when we come to the budget and look at.
So it's positive.
It's positive, yeah. And as we have seen before, the sales tax isn't growing as fast as the use tax, but the sales tax is a larger dollar amount, and so the growth is more. You have to look at it in relation to the size, but. Yeah.
Mr. Jenkins?
Yes, Maureen, I was taking a look at property tax assessment, and just wonder what kind of impact that's going to have, because I know just from my own experience, mine went up 15% in 1 year, which I thought was kind of outrageous, but some of the business ones have gone sky high as well, and they're being appealed, and all that stuff's going on out there with commercial. When do you think you might have some kind of idea where we're standing with the property tax?
Well, Paul Welcome came to talk to staff the 1st of March, and they feel like they're going to have probably 3 times as many appeals as they usually have. And I asked, well, is there any way, in the interim, during these next couple months, we can get an idea, or is there a way we can have our GIS staff pull a report of what's under appeal? There really isn't a code to do that. And also, you don't really know at what level it would be revalued if it was appealed. So each, according to statute, each year the appraiser's office has to provide it goes through the treasurer's office. They provide the preliminary assessed valuation, and that's the basis of our budget. By statute, they have to provide that by June 15th. And so I'm not too sure we're going to have interim information. I think
No, that's okay. I wasn't really asking that. I was just trying to figure out when does the muddy water clear and we actually kind of have some kind of indication where we stand with that. And that's, you say June 15th.
that should clear up a lot of it. The appraiser's office said they were going to have all hands on deck to try to process all of that and get it done. Some of the appeals may take longer because they may have further appeal levels they can go to. So I don't know if we totally get there with, but that's what we have to use to do the budget. But it should give us a good idea. In the meantime, as we talk about the budget, we've tried to think of how we can take what the appraiser's office, what their estimate was, and then look at like the effects of dark store theory. I know Vicki sent out an email saying we pretty much all of our big boxes are under appeal, and it says they're under a higher level of appeal, whatever that means. So so it's out there. It's different than what we've seen.
Yeah, the new methodology, what I read on it was, I don't know, it didn't seem to have a lot of correlation between the way they were doing the assessments and the actual property valuation. It was based more, or significantly based on their level of business and profitability and so on. It didn't seem like that seemed to be a real disconnect. If you're looking at property value, then there's a property value. You don't look at their sales value or whatever. That could be a whole different ballgame. But I can see why they got so many appeals. I mean, having read that, it's like, okay, you know. And on mine, I'm a little frustrated because I just refinanced and my appraisal was $7,000 less than what the county appraiser was saying it is. So I think they kind of came out pretty strong with their appraisal. So they are going to get pushed back.
Yeah, some of them, and over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a number of them that may go up. Some of them go up 30-40%, and
Yeah.
so it would be sticker shock for people for sure.
For the business, many of the businesses for sure.
Any other comments from council? Anyone from the public who would like to speak to this issue? All right, this is for informational purposes only, so no action is necessary. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation by Joe Serrano from Cuttuck Rock, the city's bond counsel. Welcome, Joe.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Joe Serrano, Cuttuck Rock. This is a kind of a dovetail into what Maureen was just discussing. It's really a general overview, more of a high-level discussion with respect to certain public incentives that we are seeing. It's really kind of to highlight what we are seeing in the marketplace, as opposed to talking about quite a few of the other economic development incentives that are out there. The first thing, before we get into the presentation, one thing I wanted to comment was, when we talk about these types of tools, each one is for the promotion of economic development. What that means is it's a legislative determination that you as the city, the governing body, determines what is necessary to promote the economic development. So you sit in that capacity as a governing body to determine what is best for the city, even though we are under the constricts and the confines of the statutory schemes. The things that we'll talk about this evening, just a brief overview, TIF, community improvement districts, industrial revenue bonds. We won't get into transportation development districts as much. STAR bonds are not really on the topic for discussion, nor neighborhood improvement districts. We'd like to focus on these three types of incentives, primarily because they're blended together. And then my final statement on this slide is, frequently the developments there are multiple incentive requests being at these meetings, I hear Councilmember Jenkins say, hey, they're coming in with an all-in request. And quite honestly, developers are. We represent the city, but developers are coming in with a very broad request, broader than what probably was initially intended. The first incentive is TIF. Used primarily, the purpose of the use of TIF is for acquisition of land, site improvements, public infrastructure, not vertical construction. It's for property within an eligible area. Eligibility is a statutory term. It's usually what we see as blight or conservation. Conservation is real fast. It has to be that district is less than 15% of the overall district land value or land area in the city, and more than 50% of the buildings in that district are greater than 35 years old. In 2016, there was a change into the eligibility of the TIF Act. It allows for a district to be created if all the buildings within that district are greater than 65 years old. We're seeing that more frequently as a request, as opposed to going through an analysis as to, is this a conservation? All they have to do is look at the history on these buildings and say they're in excess of 65 within that district. And interestingly, districts are being drawn in real odd ways. So we see that kind of, that will be kind of more of an interesting development we'll see with TIF. TIF can be financed with bonds. Bonds can be geo-backed, or it can be what we would prefer, no geo-backing, no full faith and credit that is pledged from the city to pay back those bonds. Or they can be with a PAYGO, as Maureen mentioned, PAYGO. We call it reimbursement of the expenditures, or it's PAYGO financing. The revenue sources from TIF. It's that incremental increase in real property taxes, as well as possibly the incremental increase in sales tax within that district. What has been carved out of the TIF, the 20 mills for the school district, there's that 8 mills that came in just recently last year that actually goes back to the school district from the school district financing program. The 8 mills is backed out, as well as the 1.5 mills for the state. For that particular issue, I want to real quickly go off script. We are not seeing school districts be weighing in as much with TIF as they once were, probably back in 2015, 2016, because they got that 8 mills. The county, I was just at the county last week talking about TIF. We don't know where the county is going to come in, but they're scrutinizing TIF a little bit more carefully than they had in the past. However, the direction from what we are hearing is, listen, we are, as a county, relying on the city to determine what is best for the city. So again, it goes back to that first statement, is what's a legislative determination determined by the governing body. Revenues for the TIF can be up to 20 years once a project area or project plan is approved. Real quick to finalize TIF, it's a multi-step process. It's 6 to 9 months. There are this is just a few items statutorily that need to be determined. One is there has to be determination of eligibility. There are 2 separate hearings. One is at the district level, the creation of the district. At that level, there's a public hearing. After the public hearing at that creation of the district level, that is when the county and the school district has the ability to veto the creation of a district. The next level is the approval of a project plan. The approval of the project plan it has to go through planning. The planning has to determine first that it's consistent with a comprehensive plan. Then it becomes before the governing body, and that is that 2/3 or greater, at least 2/3 of a vote to approve a project plan by the governing body. In Shawnee, it's 6 members have to approve a project plan, and that the approval of that project plan effectively starts the 20-year clock for that project. The next incentive, again, a very high level, community improvement districts. It's a special taxing district where you can redivert this add-on sales tax or special assessment for eligible costs. It requires a petition of the landowners. Revenues may be used for a broader variety than TIF. Interesting, real fast on this, we were receiving TDD petitions. TDD came in 2003. The CID Act was enacted in 2009. TDD really is related to transportation, bridges, roads, sidewalks. CID is a broader use. So we get into some of these, at the very end, I want to kind of highlight a few of these projects. We look at what we're seeing. It's no longer a TDD request because they can get better uses out of a CID. So you'll see a CID more frequently than a TDD. Again, with CIDs, financing with bonds or PAYGO, the bonds can be general obligation backed or not. And then the revenue sources. The revenue for in a CID, it's up to 2% add-on sales tax for 22 years, or an add-on special assessment that can be levied for up to 20 years. The third item is IRBs. Very briefly, IRBs. It's a very all these incentives are very powerful. IRBs is, as Maureen highlighted, we've had numerous requests over the years. IRBs are used to finance the acquisition, construction, or equipment of a certain type of commercial facility. It requires that there be actually revenue bonds that are issued. Importantly, in the IRB Act, it specifically prohibits the use of geo-backing for industrial revenue bonds, so the city's revenues cannot be used to repay revenue bonds. Two types, generally we bifurcate IRBs. One is for property tax, that's a property tax abatement up to 10 years. And the second is for sales tax exemption only. In a TIF district, for instance, if you have a TIF, because you're redirecting that payment of property taxes, you cannot have a property tax abatement IRB. But you can have, and what the requests have been, is a sales tax exemption IRB. I didn't want to get into the federal tax exemptions, but there are, without getting into the types of whether it's a taxable or tax exempt IRB, most of the industrial revenue bonds that are issued by the city are taxable IRBs, meaning there's not scrutiny by the IRS. There's no income tax payable. I mean, there's tax payable on the interest from those bonds, but typically they're structured in a way that the company is paying themselves. They become the bond owner, and so it's kind of a wash. More than happy to answer those questions associated with taxability if you like. The next topic, there are two other quick topics. One is when we get into a negotiation with the developer, we worry about a development agreement. The next couple slides we'll talk about what are the things that we worry about or concern ourselves with in a development agreement. The final couple slides are things that maybe the city should consider when an incentive request comes in. When a development agreement, when it's not just an IRB, when there's a request for a TIF or a CID or TDD, that we enter into a redevelopment or a development agreement. This is not statutorily driven, but this is the contract between the city and the developer that sets forth those obligations and rights of the city and the developer. This is where the process really becomes pretty strenuous. We get into long discussions. I know I was at a meeting that said, we've given away the farm. Well, in fact, we go back and we, as city staff and their outside advisors, it is long discussions. So some of the things that we worry about is what is in that development agreement when we go through what is important for the city. Importantly, in this slide, because these are long-term relationships, 20 to 20 years, we can't foresee all what can happen. I want to kind of give a few case studies, but importantly, we don't know, so we try to cover as best we possibly can some of those uncertainties or unanticipated consequences. Frequent provisions in development agreement. We usually have what we call milestones. The first one is really just our milestones, performance milestones. We also have what type of items the city will reimburse. Do we want to reimburse land acquisition costs, for instance? Well, we limit limitations on the amount and the circumstances under which incentive revenues will be made available. This is really how much of that. Are we giving them 100% TIF? We give them a 90% TIF. We want to have a TIF cap. So that really talks about those provisions included in a development agreement. Provisions relating to the circumstances under which the developer may assign its rights. We try to lock down those rights that you can't just assign it to somebody else. We want to know that we're entering into an agreement with this particular developer for this particular reason because they have this type of history. So those are certain things that we talk about when we get into the negotiations of the development agreement. The next two slides are things to consider. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I kind of look at these slides as when we go and we get a request from a developer to have a meeting, the city staff, we're sitting down, what we're kind of echoing the sentiments of what we believe or the city's told us is important. And so we look at what are we considering? So for instance, what will the city gain on the short term and the long term? We have the Belmont Promenade. Is that something that we're looking for long term? Do we want restaurants in the western part of town? What are the costs? I know Dr. Kimling has mentioned what are the costs of the services that are provided? You know, we're going to have public safety concerns. How much is that going to cost? We get into that, you know, do we actually offer 100%? Because we know there are going to be additional costs that are required to service that. Maybe we give them a 90% or an 80%. Are there certain types of, again, are there certain things that the city wants to encourage or discourage? You know, are we looking for Class A office space? Do we want to limit the types of the amount of incentives that will be made available? Do we want to limit this to TIF or CID? Again, this kind of goes a little bit more that when we want to set performance milestones. When do we want to turn on the spigot? When do we want to turn on that revenue source going to the developer or paying for bonds? There's direction from council to staff. We negotiate that, but these are the things that we consider when we go through. Again, this is a very high level discussion associated. There's a lot of details that go into it. If I may, not included in the presentation, I wanted to give just a real brief kind of comparison of the two that are out there, Westbrook Village and the Promenade. For Westbrook, and it's important kind of to understand the distinctions. Westbrook is a PAYGO. Belmont is anticipated to issue special obligation bonds, no geo-backing. Each of them is having a multiple request, TIF, CID, sales tax exemption, IRBs. The difference in Westbrook is they want 100% TIF. I think Belmont is a 90% TIF. They want incremental sales tax generated within that district, each one of those developments. Belmont has a SID special assessment. Westbrook does not. There's contemplation in Westbrook of phasing, which is important because when do we turn on that? Do we cut back that incentive if there's a phase that there's not a commitment to build? Do we cut back that incentive until there is an actual commitment to build? In Westbrook, it's a contemplated phasing. In Belmont, there's not. Importantly, with PAYGO, it really shifts the risk of underperformance or non. Yes. Pay as you go. Yeah, PAYGO. I apologize. Pay as you go financing, which is reimbursement of as the revenues come in on an annual basis. Those monies are used to pay back developer for eligible costs or to debt service bonds. So. Oh, I apologize. Westbrook has PAYGO, and Belmont has. We're anticipating the issuance of revenue bonds. PAYGO, pay-as-you-go financing. The risk for underdevelopment sits with the developer. Bonds, you're shifting that risk to the bond owners. We put in our development agreements caps, clawbacks, performance milestones. When you issue bonds, when bonds are out there, those clawbacks really are minimized because you are now beholden to bond owners. It's important, like if there's a phase project, and say that the first phase has been approved through planning and the governing body, the next phase maybe not, and maybe it's not as performing as they like. If you have bonds that are out there, it's really hard as a governing body to not approve bonds, especially if they're not performing. We see that in a couple developments around town. It's really, really hard once bonds are out there. So leave you on a few kind of quick notes, and I apologize if I've lasted a little bit longer. We do not advocate geo-backing. I don't think the city would ever go up for geo-backing of any kind of revenue bonds. We are not an advocate of that. You can see that up north, Zona Rosa has, I think it's an appropriations. The revenues are not being generated. I think the county is on the hook for $700 or $800,000. We are not an advocate of that. We would strongly advise against it unless it's absolutely unique and everybody's on board. We're not a big fan of geo-backing. It happens in Missouri more frequently. There are several different developments over in Missouri, but on the Kansas side, there's really not. Things that I mentioned that we can't anticipate, and I apologize for bringing this up in the context of this, but we've experienced some of these things, so we're looking at a 20-year plan. Some things that we can't anticipate. We didn't know that Paul Wellcome was going to have to deal with the dark store theory. We didn't know that you create a TIF district and all of a sudden there's a fire. Apologize for bringing up Slitterbond, but we didn't know, and no one could have foreseen that is actually could that terminate operations? So we have to be cautious. We have to be understanding that this is a long-term relationship, and we try the best we possibly can. Yes, Councilman.
Question on similar to this. Didn't Miriam down here guarantee theirs and end up having to eat it?
At City
Center?
I don't
Or
believe
not
that.
Center,
I
but,
don't believe they did.
Then on where
Right,
IKEA is.
I don't believe that. In fact, they did. Maureen would know more than I did. Would. Yeah. You don't see backing of special obligation bonds in
Okay.
Kansas very frequently.
I heard that they did. That's why I was asking.
I don't believe that to be the case, but I could look into that. For
Well,
you.
no, it's
Okay.
not that important.
So just to conclude, we can't foresee all those things. We try to do the best we possibly can. You go out to issue bonds, it's a little bit more aggressive than PAYGO. Again, it's shifting the risk. If there are bonds that we determine that they're going to be bonds that were issued, we want this project. It's the only way that we can get financing for this, and bonds, special obligation, not geo-backed, are going to be issued. Then we get into this real kind of rigid, especially our firm gets into a real rigid stance that says, okay, we are not going to sell this to the mom and pops. We have to make certain that they're only accredited investors. We have to make certain there's a guaranteed maximum contract. We listed conditions. I think there are probably 10 or so conditions that are listed in our development agreement to make certain, as best we possibly can, with the city staff, with those that the city's engaged, including independent revenue providers and a municipal advisor, bond counsel. We try to make certain that the best we possibly can, we do not want a default, because a default, notwithstanding debt reserves and coverage and all the other terms that are thrown out there, when there's a default, even though the city is not geo-backing it, the city's name is on that offering document. So we try to be as conservative as we possibly can when we get to that standpoint. One thing that we are seeing now, and I'll end on this, and please ask any questions that you may. As developments go, and we start seeing that there is some history with developments and revenues, as opposed to truly projections when you're issuing on dirt, we are now seeing that developers are coming in and asking for taking out their financing with issuance of bond. It's from a bond counsel's perspective, our firm has gotten more comfortable with that because you now have true revenues that you can rely on. But even then, you still have to worry about maybe 16 more years, and we can't really foresee the future. So that's kind of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. It's very, very cursory review of what we deal with on these types of incentive requests.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Very informative. Any questions, conversations from council?
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Any comments from the public? All right. This item is for informational purposes only. No action is necessary. Third item is to review policy statement number 66, comprehensive financial policy. Policy statement number 66, comprehensive financial policy, addresses the entire scope of fiscal issues the city faces, with the exception of investments, which are addressed in policy statement number 39, investment policy. The policy provides for periodic review by the governing body. Finance Director Rogers will give a high-level overview of the policy. Item is for information purposes only. Welcome back, Maureen.
Thank you. We won't address the entire scope that it, so, we created this policy a few years ago, just to kind of pull together a whole bunch of existing policies. Shawnee has a long history as a frugal and just community that's very interested in sound financial management. So we had already had good documents. We looked at policies from peer cities, GFOA best practices, and gathered input from our financial advisor, bond counsel, auditors, and Moody's, and created what is a fairly short document for all that it covers. And there's no recommended changes tonight. It's pretty general, so it doesn't have a lot of particulars that need to change. And there's not any financial, any accounting pronouncements that require a change. The benefits of a financial policy is really just to institutionalize the ideas we already have about sound financial practices, and listed a number of those there. One of the big ones we've worked on in our budget structure the last few years is defining dependable revenue structures, like for our equipment replacement and facilities and maintenance, to make sure that those are able to be done. That's an example. And the policy comes up when it came up not long ago when we talked to Moody's, and it's always good to be able to say we have policies for all of these things you ask about, and I'll send them to you. Minimizing risk, it clarifies strategic intent. Sometimes when I'm talking to Moody's, they will notice something in our financials and they'll ask me to explain it, and we're able to explain that there's a plan behind that, and that the governing body has a plan for several years. So these policies help put that into perspective, and then compliance with laws and best practices for decision making and supporting your bond rating. And it also provides a framework for staff to be able to evaluate new projects and say, how does that fit in with our financial structure? By statute, we're required to have a balanced budget, and which generally means expenditures are funded by current revenues. You can also use reserves that are already on hand. The goal is always to get it to where it's in a surplus position, but over the last few budget cycles, we've moved toward establishing those equipment reserves and different unmet needs. So the ability to make that conscious decision to use reserves, that's an example of how we've proactively planned. Also, using long-term revenues for long-term expenditures. A good example is the 10-year Johnson County Courthouse sales tax. The idea is to not use that for staff, it's to use it for shorter-term projects. The policy also it just kind of codifies the fact that we do this revised budget. Not every city actually does that formal of a process for that, but we do. We do 10-year financial forecasts, and with the goal that the special revenue funds are going to be forecasted realistically to have positive balances in the future years. The CIP, it talks about the capital improvement program and of the CIP and matching the forecasts, and also having, as I mentioned, a goal of adequate ongoing funding for these equipment, facility, and technology reserves. The capital improvement program, the policy spells out some of the parameters of that. It's a 6-year CIP. It's designed to connect community needs with the funding sources that we have, to be approved annually by the governing body. This year, we are planning on moving the schedule up to coincide with the budget process. It's usually been right afterwards, and this is going to, I think, help it synchronize a little bit better. Revenue policies, we talked about the non-recurring revenue. We talked about property tax diversification and the goal, the long-standing goal here at the city of the improving or increasing the commercial and industrial assessed valuation. The goal is to evaluate user fees annually. That's done a lot at the staff level. We usually look at them at some capacity or other every year. And to aggressively pursue outside funding, we usually prioritize, if a project has outside funding, that will be given priority over other things. And we look at shared services between other entities whenever we get a chance as well. Debt, there's quite a bit in the policy about use of debt that we're not going to go into a lot. It gets technical pretty quickly, but we look at how much debt do we already have, and there is a statutory legal debt limit. We are nowhere near hitting that limit. We're pretty far below it. We look at economic conditions and market trends. Is it a good time to issue bonds? It has been for quite a few years, but it isn't always. Sometimes the market's volatile and you don't know what you're going to get. Outside funding sources, and we want to align our debt with the useful life of the asset. Most of our debt, as you know, is 10 years. We will be looking at a 15-year for stormwater improvements, facilities, like a justice center, 20 years. So, but generally they're 10 years. And we look at key ratios, as does Moody's, to evaluate. We evaluate our own debt capacity, and they evaluate us very stringently on our debt capacity. We sell our bonds by competitive bid. There are situations, and the policy provides for those to use negotiated bidding. I know a few years ago when I was at Olathe during the recession, we were doing a very large temporary note issue of $100 million, and we were not able to sell it all in one shot like we usually were. We had to break it into pieces because the market was kind of falling apart at that time. So those are the type of situations. Fund balance policy. The goals of a fund balance policy is to smooth out, just like your savings account at home, to make sure that you don't have an interruption of essential services, you have tax rate stability, you're able to handle downturns, and you have enough cash flow to meet the obligations you have. Our target is 30% of budgeted revenues. Normally, we actually come in higher than that, but that's kind of our minimum target. And then our absolute minimum, the GFOA has their minimum best practices that to have under no circumstances less than 2 months of revenue. But most of the cities here, pretty much all of them in Johnson County, are running at 40% or above. Moody's, what they will tell you, and S&P as well, is that 30% or higher for AAA rated cities. That's kind of a minimum. There are many, many other criteria for AAA, and it's very difficult to get there. It's a goal that we keep looking at. Normally, the cities who are AAA, often they're ones that don't have as great a need to issue debt. It's not very much risk if you don't really hardly ever issue debt in the first place, like Prairie Village or even Merriam. They just issued debt. They just became AAA. They just issued debt for their new community center. But other than that, they can cash fund pretty much everything else, their streets and everything. And so Moody's looks at those type of things, and so it's a little harder if they kind of know you need to issue debt to be able to, you have a street network you need to build out and this type of thing. I was just asked about this in our recent Moody's call. Can we have a replenishment policy in here for if you use fund balance, then what's the plan to restore it? And so it was good that I was able to say, yes, we do have that in our policy. And so there's some of the situations where a significant amount of fund balance could be used if there was a devastating natural disaster or depression, or another need at your discretion. And then the plan would be, staff recommends a plan to restore within 5 years. But it just provides that structure. It doesn't say what the plan is going to be. And for financial accounting and reporting, Shawnee will adhere to generally accepted accounting principles. There's a lot of smaller cities in Kansas that are on a cash basis, and that's perfectly fine. Where you run into needing to do GAAP is when you're issuing bonds. Full and open disclosure, we are required by statute, and we want to do this anyway, to have an annual independent audit. And then just some of our budgetary controls, reporting, like our monthly financial report. The auditors take a look every year at our internal control procedures, and we go into quite a bit of detail on that. Things like the purchasing manual, the procedures that departments go through before they buy anything, the approval steps. And in our budget, the policy provides that the city manager has the ability to make some reductions or move money from one department to another, not increase the budget in total, but make some minor types of reallocations. And that's really all I have on this one.
All right. Thank you, Maureen. Any questions, conversation from the council? I have just one of my own. We're talking about a 30% goal of diversification from the commercial sector. Earlier on in your previous conversations, we were talking about the dark store theory.
Mm-hmm.
If that comes through, do we have any idea of what the impact would be on that 30% diversification?
Well, what they're saying, like in some cities, for some stores, it's reduced by 20 to 40%. I think it depends maybe on where it's at, and I think there's a lot of variables. And not all of our commercial property would probably be involved. I don't know how widespread. Sometimes if there's success in getting these type of appeals, then other people, like, I want to get me some of that too. So I don't know. You don't know where it's going to end. I would say at first, if you just looked at our big boxes,
Right.
it would have some effect on this percentage, but probably not a huge effect. I don't think it would send it back down to 20% or something. I don't quite know exactly how that would play out, but I don't think it would be devastating on it.
Right. Just curious. Any questions, comments? Any comments from the public? All right. Thank you, Maureen. That item is for information purposes only. No action is necessary. Fourth item is to discuss energy savings performance contracting. Purchase of KCP&L streetlights are included as an unmet need during the 2017-18 budget process. While researching this issue further, staff looked at other cost-saving measures related to the energy efficiency in city buildings. Staff has received 4 energy audits, and Caitlin Gard is here to present more information on the findings. Well, nope, doesn't look like Caitlin to me.
Thank you. Oh.
Welcome, Doug.
All right, we'll go home now. Good evening, Doug Whitaker, Public Works Director. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to look at the city's energy costs and just discuss some potential ways to reduce. See if I can get this to work. There it goes. we're going to look at two areas that we'd like to present tonight for just really it's for council discussion and direction. One is purchase of the KCPL streetlights. And then the second is to look at a concept of performance contracting. The intent of both of these items is to identify cost savings and utilize it to upgrade equipment to reduce ongoing energy and maintenance costs. This map provides a breakdown of this over 6,000 streetlights that we have in the city. The KCP&L streetlights are what we're looking at to purchase, and as you can see, they're primarily in the east side or east portion of the city. They're the red dots. Just for reference in regards to the KCP&L streetlights, several cities within Johnson County, most of our sister cities, have already purchased them, and the most recent being Olathe and Prairie Village just bought their streetlights in the last 2 years. And so at this point, we completed a high-level analysis of the purchase just to assure that it made financial sense before we really started spending any money. In the next few slides, we'll just outline some of those results. Currently, the annual lease cost for a KCP&L lights is approximately $655,000 a year, or about $345 per pole. Comparing that to our own street lights, we are spending approximately $143 per pole annually, and that's for energy and maintenance costs. And so this provides a potential savings of approximately $388,000 per year. And at this point, and I'll take you through this, this does not include any savings for upgrading to LED. However, that could alone, reduce our energy consumption by 45 to 55%, and also our maintenance costs by about 60%, because you've got way less time. You got to go out there and change bulbs from that standpoint.
How much did you say on maintenance percent?
About 60%. Those bulbs last about 50,000 hours. Again, how much vibration and all they take. So that's almost a 10-year bulb that you don't have to, and then you don't have ballast and other things with them. So there's a lot less trips to each of the streetlights from that standpoint. Let me explain this slide, because this is where we got started on this project probably about 2 years ago. And if you look at that high estimate of $5.5 million, that was the initial price that the KCP&L shot for us. And when we received that, we basically laid it on the desk and said, okay, we'll think about this. Because at that cost, it's about $2,900 per pole. And I can go buy brand new poles and LED lights and install them for about $3,200. So obviously, and if you know it's the older section that's got the KCP&L lights, they can't be worth anywhere near that amount. So as we kind of, like I said, we set it aside, we began looking at it again here just recently, knew that Prairie Village had just bought there, and so we got to talking with their financial consultant, and for a real minimal fee, he's been working with us and gone through it, and we've done a lot of comparisons, and actually they did both Olathe and Prairie Villages. So as we collected our data, we were able to kind of match and make sure that we were in the same ballpark so that we weren't lowballing here to kind of make things work. We really could see that our data was realistic. And what we found is Olathe was charged about $1,263 per pole, about less than half of what we were quoted. And Prairie Village was around $1,107. So just to be conservative, we kind of used an average and added a percent, so we went with $1,350 just to kind of build in a little bit of inflation since we're just doing the analysis. And so with that, that's how we came up with the $2.6 million that you see up there for the low estimate. Then on top of that, to finalize that cost, we'll have to go get a detailed inventory from KCP&L. And the way they do that is you go into a preliminary agreement with them. You pay them kind of a deposit, and when we looked at that deposit, we could see what Prairie Village paid, and we know what Olathe paid, and based on the quantity, it would be in the $10,000 to $12,000 range to do that, and then you would get your detailed inventory and a price. And again, it would be in a preliminary engineering or preliminary purchase agreement. If they came back with a 5.5 million, we can throw it back in their face and say, we'll go on and keep paying the, the fee that we're paying rather than trying to do that, because it wouldn't pay off. We'd be buying an awful lot to then have to maintain. So that, working with the financial consultant, the results of that analysis do show that purchasing the streetlights provides economic value to the city. And so we would like, that's why, so we're bringing it to you, just to let you know that. What I didn't want to do, you can call me cheap, I didn't want to spend $10,000 to $12,000 to find out it was going to be, it wasn't economical or feasible from the start. So we went in and did our conservative numbers. Like I said, we compared it with the other cities, and we feel like we've got accurate numbers for you. It makes sense. Let's proceed. It made sense for Olathe and Prairie Village just recently. On top of that, the last part of that slide is, after we determine that, the other thing is we have talked, we can upgrade our own streetlights to LED. As you see the last point there, Westar actually has an LED upgrade program. And I know they're already working on that because they were too bright on one of the streets out there, and they were able to dial it down and make the homeowner happy. So, but KCP&L, we asked them, we've got some new ones. I think we got a streetlight petition coming up at the next meeting for you. We asked, well, why don't we just have those put up as LEDs? And they said, oh no, we don't do LEDs in Kansas. So with that said, we won't get, if we're buying them, if we're leasing those lights from them, they're not going to turn them. Right now, they have no program to go to LED. Well, it uses more energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but we did find out that's because our traffic engineer was just talking to them. So.
Brian, how many poles did Prairie Village purchase, and how many did Olathe purchase?
Prairie Village was just a little over 2,000, so that's why they're very comparable to the 1,900. Olathe was double. And so when we looked at it, their price was about double. Their fee, their initial deposit was about double. So that's why I said we feel like we've got some accurate, good information to work with.
And Doug, from at one point in time, we had a little conversation about this. One of the challenges in the buyback of the lighting poles was that not all of those lighting circuits were metered very efficiently. In other words, some of those street lights they'd bring a power leg off the nearest feed. Has there been any thought about how to address that challenge if we go through with the buyout?
What I found is I did get information out of them to provide the tariffs, and the tariff sets in there that they will take the off-peak rate and charge you for what they would, assume would be the hours that the light would be on. So if we say 12 hours a day times 365 days a year times the wattage, we would know what the wattages we're using, and we would back into it that way.
Got it.
Is the way they would do it. So it is not like a set tariff that says, oh, you're going to pay me $10 a month or whatever it is. They do it based on the energy consumption and on that
Projected burn
off-peak.
time.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing would be the projected time.
Right.
So.
All right. Cool. Mr. Sanford?
Poles that are on the private streets, we don't pay, maintain, do anything with those, do we?
No, those, we don't maintain them. We don't pay for anything on them.
They break them, that's their homes association.
Yeah, they would. The private ones, if they're in a private area, and we only have on this map, I think 43, because I went back and said, okay, what are the private ones today?
They're at Corvera
we
Road
don't
and
do-
67th Street, aren't they?
Yeah, over there. Well, we don't deal with those at all.
Right. Okay.
And most of our new subdivisions have LEDs
Tanglewood,
going
wouldn't
in.
Singlewood, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know which one it was, but I know it was. Yeah.
Great. Very good. Thank you, Doug.
So with that, that's basically, and I'll get to the next steps, but that's what we've got, from the standpoint of the streetlights. Again, it's high level. We get to more detailed numbers, but at this point, it makes sense to, if you so choose. financially, it makes sense to move forward with it. It's not something that we've got a 25-year payback on a 10-year pole or 20-year pole. The next area is performance contracting. And again, I said this is a concept that's been out there. It's a tool for funding energy and facility improvements. It leverages savings in your current operating budget to pay for improvements, and there's a guarantee of cost and savings. And this slide kind of takes you through the process. First, you do a preliminary audit. We received 4 preliminary audits, and they are all at no cost, so the city has, other than staff time, the city has no investment in this at this point. It takes a high-level look at your buildings and identifies potential energy savings, et cetera, and where they feel that you could, use those funds to pay for the upgrades, et cetera. The next step in it is we would issue a RFQ, a request, and do it on a qualification based and select a firm that would then do the investment grade audit. And in this case, we would choose from those that are participating in that Facility Conservative Improvement Program, which is that FCIP document that was attached in the packet memo. With that, they do an investment grade audit, the inventory and condition assessment of all of the facility equipment, and actually look at the building envelopes and like that to identify energy loss from that standpoint. Then the city would determine, once we get that investment grade audit, then the city would determine the scope of what we wanted to do. Just because they list 400 things to do doesn't mean we have to do all 400 things to be able to use their services or go forward. We can determine what the payback period is and how much we want to, invest at that time or prioritize from there. Just as a caveat, so that we're not sitting there thinking everything is free, there could be, and we're just estimating, this is, I think, conservative, $40,000 to $60,000 that once you got the investment grade audit done, if we just said we're not going to do anything, some of them may ask for reimbursement for all of that time, because this is not something that's just done with one individual. They've got engineers involved, analysts, et cetera, going through all of the detailed data and coming up with a detailed inventory. To be very honest with you, our financial consultant said the audit is well worth it, because it gives you such what all your equipment is. It gives you also the actual condition of the equipment, where it stands, what its age is, and how much life it's got. So it helps you even with prioritizing what you should look at going forward. So again, if you go forward with a construction contract, then that is just rolled into it, and there is no separate fee from it. Some of the benefits of performance contracting is obviously the energy savings are guaranteed. They will establish what would be your energy savings and then guarantee that if you do what they're recommending, you will hit those savings. If not, they actually reimburse you for the difference. Obviously, there's safety valves built into that, but that's the concept of it. The utility savings you can use for facility improvements. It decreases your carbon footprint from the standpoint of obviously your emissions and like that, and the power, the way it's controlled and like that, or produced. And then if the project is bonded up front, the annual savings can be used as the bond payment or used to pay for deferred maintenance and improvement of the city facilities. Again, that's a decision you make once you get your investment grade audit. And then one of the last benefits is they can handle the whole thing, so it's like a turnkey design and project management is provided by the energy service company. Some of the potential projects, as they went through the preliminary audits, they looked at City Hall, Civic Center, Justice Center, the big buildings, and they said the high-level estimates were, all of the firms that came in were about $200,000 annually, not including street lights. So the street light would be something separate, and we could work that in from there. The primary, my notes. The primary savings are basically, as you can imagine, would be in lighting upgrades to LED, reductions in water usage. That's using low flush valves, et cetera, just to cut down on your water usage in your restrooms and wet areas. HVAC and control system upgrades, better equipment, also better control so that you're managing that equipment. And then building envelope improvements as far as window doors and like that to make sure the buildings are sealed up. And the other thing with this is additionally these savings could potentially be used for projects such as security and layout efficiencies at City Hall. So you've got a lot of opportunities once you have that identified savings, and then again, it's just we can make those decisions as to where it goes. So many of these, again, like I'm not going to go through each of the buildings, but it's primarily all the same. But many of these projects are currently forecasted for replacement and upgrades over the next 10 years. And so the savings improvements could occur a little faster if we utilize these identified savings as we move forward. So as far as next steps, first with the KCP&L streetlights, basically that we would need direction that we could proceed, that obviously there's a cost to buy or purchase some. We'd have to make that's something we want to move forward with, and then we would go ahead with that deposit and get that initial information, and then I would have them do a complete new analysis once we've got the exact data so that we know where we're standing, and then we could move from there. So that would be the next steps on the streetlight purchase. As far as the performance contracting, again, we would need to go out and get an RFQ and select a firm to come in and do that investment grade audit. Again, that would be based on qualification based. And before that contract could be signed, if you so chose to have us go forward with that, we would bring that contract back to you for final approval before we would start the investment grade audit. So with that, that's all I've got. I can try to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Very informative. Any questions, comments from the council? Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. I think this was really helpful, and I think both ideas are fantastic. I know we've talked about the streetlights for a while, so I'm glad to see that continuing to move down the line, and this performance contracting is really interesting to me, so I would be very much in favor of going forward with the RFQ.
Mr. Neighbor.
I would echo Stephanie's thing. It sort of sounds like this process is going to the doctor and getting a very, very thorough checkup to know what you got to work on and when you work on and timing. And I think it'd be excellent because the savings in the LEDs and the power, just like I said, I haven't bought a light bulb in the last year because we switched to LEDs. I'm for it.
Any other comments? On my own behalf, extremely familiar with performance contracting concept. I used to negotiate those contracts in a previous life, so ideally suited for a municipal marketplace. Any questions from public? All right, we have two recommended actions to consider. The first recommended action is to consider forwarding the KCP&L streetlight purchase analysis to the governing body for approval. I will accept the motion.
Second.
The motion has been made and is seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Second recommended action is to consider forwarding the issuance of the RFQ for a performance contract investment grade facility audit through the State of Kansas Facility Conservation Improvement Program to the governing body for approval. I'll accept the motion.
Motion for approval.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Final item is to discuss council president research. After I was elected as council president, I requested the staff research how other cities in the area elect their council president or vice mayor. City Clerk Powell will make a brief presentation on his findings, and this item is for information only.
Good evening. I have just a few slides to go over with you that should not differ at all from what was in the council memo. I thought we would just sort of briefly talk about what our current process is, talk about a few of the other cities, and then really it'll just be a discussion among you all on what you all think is the best steps going forward. Ellis and I will be here to answer any questions that might come up along the way. So we have Charter Ordinance 45, and that establishes the council president role. It also establishes the duties for that role and when that person is elected. So currently it is at the first regular meeting in January of each year. Policy Statement 7, Conduct of Meetings, establishes the vice chair role as well as their duties and when they're elected. And that person is also elected the first meeting in January. Both positions are voted on by the governing body. The way the process has historically gone is someone makes a motion, they get the second, and we vote on it. And as soon as someone gets the majority vote, then that's who becomes president and vice president of the council. I looked at several other cities nearby, and for the most part, they all kind of take a little bit different approach. Prairie Village has their position based on tenure. So the council member with the longest consecutive tenure is nominated and voted on. If there's multiple council members with the same amount of service, then it's chosen by ward number in numerical order. And then if a council member chooses not to be nominated, then it goes to the second longest serving council member. And I provide this chart just to show you kind of where the council members here fall in terms of their years of service.
Oh, right.
Overland Park does a very somewhat unique process where each council member has a ballot with the council members' names on it, and then they select the person that they would like to nominate to be council president. They turn those ballots into the mayor. They calculate how many votes each person got, and as long as one council member receives 7 affirmative votes, then that person becomes the council president. If there's no majority or a tie, then they redo the ballots, and if someone abstains or doesn't check a box, then those aren't counted. And when I talked to their city clerk, she said that it had been a long time since they had gone through more than one round of ballots. And here's an example of what that ballot in Overland Park looks like.
So do you mean the first time they pass it out, somebody out of 12 gets 7 votes?
Yeah.
That happens every time?
Yes.
You're not allowed to
That
talk to
seems-
each other either.
That seems, anyway, that seems interesting, but
Yeah. I thought so too.
mathematically, I wouldn't think that would happen.
Yeah. Olathe has a biennial organizational meeting where their mayor pro tem, which is the same as our council president, is elected at the first regular meeting in January, and that person serves for 2 years. And they use the same process that we currently use to make those nominations and vote on those positions. And Lenexa has a rotation every 6 months by council seat. And so it begins with the first seat in the first ward and then rotates to the first seat in the second ward and so on. And then it repeats with the second seat in the first ward and so on. So their seat assignments aren't really determined by who's sitting where. It was determined a long time ago, they said, to help keep track of who has served that role as councils change. And so they do have an item every 6 months under their appointments section of their agenda where they vote on the next sort of rotation. And then Leawood does a 3-month rotation. So each December, the mayor appoints the council member to be the presiding officer. And then that position rotates every 3 months until everyone has had a chance to serve. And no council member can be the presiding officer for more than 1 3-month period during the year. And so we are here to facilitate any discussion that you might want to have on it. As I said before, it's really a decision for you all to discuss and ponder. If you did feel like a new process needed to elect the council president and or vice president, we felt that could easily be incorporated as a revision to PS7 instead of making any changes to a charter ordinance. So, and that is all I have.
All right. Stephen, thank you. Very informative. Personally speaking, I appreciate the research that went into it. For my fellow council members, this past January, it struck me as just a little bit awkward process. And when I spoke with several of you afterwards, I kind of got a similar sentiment. So I asked that this get brought up. Within the context of that, any thoughts, conversation from council members? Stephanie?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this up for discussion. I have thought this process is kind of an odd one for the 4.5 years I've been on council, and I think it just sets itself up for at least the perception of some sort of open meetings violation, as we continue to see. I like, just for what it's worth to throw it out there, I think Overland Park has an interesting idea of doing kind of a secret ballot, but I would caveat that a bit. I think the way that we take motions in seconds for a person who's interested is odd. We never really ask that person if they're interested. So I would favor something like what Overland Park did with a private ballot, with the caveat that if you're interested in serving for the council president, that perhaps you self-identify and provide a little bit of an explainer about why, so that we're a little more informed as we're casting our vote for president. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just going to say I really agree with Stephanie that it would be very helpful, especially for new people, to know who actually is interested and why. So, but I think every year that would be very helpful so that you have an idea going into it. And then I think the secret ballot idea makes a lot of sense as well.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Or I guess, I mean the ballot, whatever.
A ballot.
But, you know, piece of paper that you write it on. Yes.
Mr. Jenkins.
Yes, I think some of the problems that came out of the last election for council president really weren't the fault of anyone. It would be more than it was the fault of the state of Kansas when they changed the date we were going to swear in the new council people. Because if the council people were sworn in April, the committee, the chair would have been elected in January. You would have a chance to at least know who the hell a person was before they come up for a vote. I found that to be kind of disconcerting when we had somebody who was council president had been on the council for about 15 minutes, and it was nothing personal. It's just that it'd be nice if, you know, in the old days, but you at least had from April through, you know, through January.
It used to be.
Hey, you see how the people operate, you see how their ideology is, and how they tend to vote, and how they interact with other council members. I mean, you get a lot of information from people over the process of 8 months of observing the person in meetings and so on. And this one, boy, we had nothing like that at all. It was Sam, bam, thank you, ma'am, here we go, you know, and we got a new council president. And for the record, I think you're doing a great job. So that's not the issue here. I think the point is, you know, that really doesn't provide enough information to those folks who are trying to make a vote at that point. And I don't know, that situation is going to be really alleviated right off the bat. I mean, if you use the ballot method, you're still going to have the problems. Wow, we just swore in 2 new members, or 1 member, 3 members, or whatever, you know, and you're having to make a decision on that person at the very first meeting you attend. And that, I don't know, I mean, maybe we should look at changing the time we elect the council president. Maybe it should be moved from January for us to June, or something, at least that 6 months.
Off cycle.
Off cycle kind of thing. I'm just throwing that out as fodder. I don't really, you know, haven't really thought it through that much, but I did find that to be very uncomfortable. And, you know, I agree with Stephanie's comments about the nomination process. Wow, the first person gets a nomination in, you know, a lot of times that's it, you know, and not always, but a lot of times it is it. So I think some kind of process where there's maybe even a slate provided to that meeting. You know, these people have offered up their interest in being a candidate for that And they're on actually a ballot to choose from and so on. We do the ballot, and that we would wind up electing somebody. It just, and I think it puts you on the spot, really. Here you are, you're the new guy, and you're kind of, oh boy, I wonder how this is going over. I mean, I'd be thinking that anyway if I was the new guy, and there people were electing me as council president. So, there should be something said for longevity, but you could have somebody that's been there for a really long time, and they're really not the kind of guy you want for the council president. That's not a sure bet either. So, some kind of ballot thing, and at least a person offering up the fact that I would like the job. I think that might be a good idea.
Right.
I think, we used to do it at the fiscal break. It was in July, or June, I think. We switched it just when the cycles for elections switched back.
Yeah, I would think 6 months would be at least a reasonable period of time to, get to know
right
somebody
after
and
the
get a feel
election.
for 'em.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was right after the election.
Right
It
after
would
the
be-
election, in April.
Yeah, it was April since I've been here. I mean, April. But
Okay.
It wasn't done in June.
My question, Ellis, has it been stated, some of the conversation was that this cycle, or this swearing in, the way the law was written, was only for 2018. Is there anything up there? I'll ask Cindy, but I don't know there's been anything that it could go back to be the week that the new people were installed the week after the election, which would install the new people in November rather than in.
Have they done
That's
that?
only 1 month, basically.
They could always do anything, obviously, as we have
Yeah,
already found out. I have seen legislation changing the span of time between the November election and the primary election and the time they will take office to eliminate that period of time. I haven't seen anything that would otherwise change the terms. And as Mr. Jenkins was talking earlier, I wanted to make sure it was clear. If you change the date that you elect the council president, then you have to change the charter ordinance, unfortunately. So you could have a policy statement that would simply say, prior to the meeting, anyone that's interested in the position would state, or at the meeting state, before you do your.
Well, it may be charter change would be appropriate, because this wasn't something that the city caused. I mean, it was imposed upon us by external influence, by the state changing the election dates and so on. And so maybe we do need to take a look at changing our charter, or that portion of the charter, saying, because of this modification to the election cycle by the state dictate, we are going to change our date to date X or whatever. I don't think changing the charter, I don't know how much it requires, but if it's not impossible, then what's wrong with looking at making a change to the charter?
That's up to you all. You obviously have to go through the charter ordinance process, which requires the 2 publications, and you have to wait for 60 days for the protest.
Sure, we got time.
I would just throw out here, not only for governing bodies, local governing bodies, but this was a real problem for school boards as well, because they were thrown in the same thing. So my spot on this is, I agree with Stephanie. I like the idea of the ballot. Someone, you can state if you're interested in it or not, and then some sort of ballot is fine. But I would like to check and find out what the status is in Topeka, or call Eric or someone and see if there's going to be any change to it, and so we can put this all in the hopper and then sort it out what's going to be best.
Well, no one follows that, but I haven't seen any other change other than to eliminate what we call the lame duck period, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any other discussion, and of course, there's no state law or statutory provision on the council president, so you're kind of on your own on that one.
Okay.
Mr. Sandifer.
I was under the understanding they were still going to be bringing something up on it at the state. Is that true?
I haven't heard, but it wouldn't surprise me again. They wreaked enough
That's
havoc
what
the
I heard
last
from
time.
one of
It
the
would make sense if they want to try it again, but I think there was so much turmoil over the last one that they're probably not going to touch it. But I haven't talked to the legislators about it.
And in what we've been doing, changing it a little bit, of changing our charter and everything, I think we ought to wait a little bit and find out just what the state, if everything's going to fall through, if everything's going to stay the way it is before we start changing our charter. It appears to me, you know, through the years that I've been around here watching this, it's always went well. People are able to talk to each other as long as there's not decisions made, but you're welcome to call people and say, hey, I'm interested in the job. And there's not any issues with all of this. We just seem to have a council that has a few people that just really like to rub it and push it and make it look like it's really something it's not. And it appears that the people that are so upset are the people that can't win. So,
Yeah, I think you're just completely off base there. Sorry. I think, yeah, well, I don't agree with that.
Mr. Adrian.
I like how the other cities do a shorter period. I think 2 years, for example, someone that was on for a brief period of time to get elected in, I think it would be nice to see a rotation. I think other cities, yeah, a 1 year rotation. Oh, it is currently. Oh, okay. I thought it was 2. I apologize.
All right. Any other comments? So I think in the interest of going forward, I'm going to try and break this down a little bit. I think there's a consensus that the existing process needs to be adjusted. All right. And so in the interest of going forward with that, a couple of things. Number one is that prior to any nomination, that there is an opportunity for council members that are interested in the position to speak to it, express an interest and state their qualifications with why they want the position. I'm looking for some consensus, and I'm seeing nodding heads on that. Okay. And then the third piece of that is in lieu of the nominating process is that we have a ballot and then vote by ballot. Is again looking at my council members for.
I think as long as you don't talk to other people, it's probably okay. Yeah. You can just not talk to people.
So hang on. So Stephen, again, good work, and thank you. I'm going to ask for a next step. The comments that you just heard from us about taking, I think it's the Overland Park is the ballot process. Refining that a little bit so that we can include a opportunity for council members that are interested in the position to express their interest, speak what they think of why and what they think their qualifications are.
And you would want that to happen like at maybe the meeting prior to the first meeting in January, so that it's in your packet, or would you just want it to be at that, put it all in the packet, or? Oh, okay. Yeah, we could easily draft something for you all to consider. That would be. I think I understand what they're.
I think so too, but that action wouldn't be binding, of course. So if you did not submit your name prior to the meeting, if the meeting time came, the governing body could always elect someone who was not. Well, maybe by policy statement, what I think would solve the problem is if Stephen prepares something along the lines of that if there's a member of the governing body that is interested in becoming council president, maybe they could so indicate in time that we could put it in the packet and say the following council members have indicated to the city manager an interest in becoming council president. They're being considered for council president, and then we could put it in the packet in advance of the meeting. Is that more of a problem or less of a problem?
Let me ask an ignorant question. Is there any challenge we would have if the first year of the meeting is an opportunity for council members to express an interest? The second meeting of the year is when we actually vote by ballot.
We would have to change our charter ordinance, and because the provision specifically provides that the council.
I was afraid that was
will
your
elect
answer, yeah.
at that meeting. This was a policy statement that basically was prepared based on the Overland Park charter ordinance provision. The number 5 represents the number 7 from the Overland Park charter ordinance because they have 12 members. And the second provision on abstention and blanks, it sounds kind of wordy, but it's necessary because Kansas law follows that old common law provision that abstentions are counted as being in the majority or going with the majority vote, unless you modify it, which is the reason for B and why a lot of our provisions that you see in our code, our charter ordinance, provides that the vote is by a majority of those who are present and voting. It modifies that common law provision. So that's where B came up with. And C, it follows our existing charter ordinance provision, which provides that the mayor does have authority by charter ordinance to cast a vote in favor of an item if it's one less than needed for approval. So that was kind of a compromise based on the Overland Park model. And that could be accomplished by policy statements, so we wouldn't have to change the charter ordinance. Yes, sir. I didn't think of the vice chair until I was sitting here tonight and I heard Stephen say the word. But yes, certainly would.
Good point. I didn't think about that either, but absolutely valid.
That would be up to you all. I would think either way.
So we've got a timing challenge here. So good point. We could do a ranked ballot. 1, 2, if you have. Yeah. Exactly. All right. We're a little bit of an impasse here. I think we want to change the status quo. There's a distinct timing challenge in terms of expressing an interest and then taking a vote. Stephen, could we ask you to take these comments, consolidate them, And then maybe we table this for a future committee session. Yes, sir.